Welcome to the Economic Bulletin, where we present comprehensive coverage and expert insights on key updates regarding pivotal economic trends and financial shifts. Welcome back to the news in detail. We start off with the United States, where former President Donald Trump has renewed his call for imposing extreme tariffs during an interview with Bloomberg, suggesting a 2,000% levy on goods entering the United States. Trump, the Republican nominee for the 2024 election, labeled tariffs as the most beautiful word in the dictionary and defended his economic plan for a second term, claiming that such measures would discourage companies from relocating overseas. Speaking at the Economic Club of Chicago, Trump criticized the European Union, accusing it of treating the U.S. unfairly in trade. He reiterated his pledge to implement severe tariffs on foreign imports to protect American manufacturers.
The European Union is preparing for potential tensions with the US as former President Donald Trump renews his calls for hefty tariffs on imports. In an interview with Bloomberg News, Trump defended his economic plan, proposing tariffs as high as 2,000% on goods entering the US to protect American manufacturers. Trump's comments have sparked concerns of a potential trade war, as the EU is reportedly drafting a list of American goods to target with retaliatory tariffs if he wins the upcoming US election. EU officials, however, prefer to avoid a full-scale conflict by reaching an agreement with Trump on key issues like China. Trump, in his interview, emphasized the role of tariffs in compelling companies to stay in the US, saying, "The higher the tariff, the more likely it is that the company will come into the United States." He went on to claim, "Our allies, especially the European Union, have taken advantage of us." While the EU is wary of repeating the trade tensions seen during Trump's first term, officials remain prepared to act if necessary, signaling a potential escalation in US-EU trade relations.
Joining us today to discuss the latest developments in the American economy and the potential economic impacts of Donald Trump's possible return to the U.S. presidency is Peter Tanos, an economic expert. Mr. Peter, welcome to Q News. We're glad to have you with us on the Economic Bulletin. Now, the European Union is preparing a list of American goods to target if Trump imposes new tariffs. How could a potential trade conflict with the European Union affect the U.S. economy and global trade relations?
What you just said shows how ridiculous the Trump's proposals are for tariffs. He may not have been serious when he talked about 2,000%. It was probably just another one of his mindless ramblings. But looking at what is in his program, the idea of tariffs on everything that comes in, even in a 10th grade high school class, they would know that this is highly inflationary. And it is very unlikely to happen even if he is elected.
Now, regarding Trump's argument that tariffs will deter companies from offshoring jobs and bring manufacturing back to the United States, do you agree that this policy would effectively create more domestic jobs, or could it have unintended consequences on employment?
Let's look at the logic behind all this. Why do we import certain items instead of manufacturing them here? We import them because they are either cheaper or better than things that we are currently making. So if we adopted what he said, first of all, it takes years to build factories, so it would have no immediate positive effect. Secondly, if we are producing items here that cost more than the items we import, that would be highly inflationary. And this is so obvious that it explains why he was unable to answer the questions about it during the interview with the Economic Club of Chicago a couple of days ago.
Now, let's integrate China into our conversation. With Trump proposing tariffs as high as 60% on Chinese goods and 10% across the board, how would such a tariff structure affect inflation, especially given the Federal Reserve's ongoing efforts to manage it?
Well, that answer seems obvious, but first, let's back up a minute. Some tariffs on Chinese goods are necessary and already exist because China is subsidizing the manufacture of some of their items, specifically electric cars. They are making electric cars at a much cheaper cost than they cost in Europe or the United States. So a tariff on that to protect our markets would make some sense. But a 60% tariff is completely ridiculous because it would be highly inflationary. We import $500 billion worth of goods from China a year. Imagine the effect of a 60% tax on top of that. It truly doesn't make any sense at all.
Now, Mr. Peter, looking ahead, can the U.S. economy sustain high tariffs in the long term, or would they slow down growth? And what sectors of the economy would be most vulnerable to such trade policies?
Yeah, any sector of the economy where we import a great deal of goods from China would be affected. And of course, those include a lot of manufactured goods, electronics, and other goods, and as we just talked about, also automobiles. The effect would be twofold. Number one, it would be highly inflationary. And number two, it would create a slowdown in the economy because fewer goods would be purchased at the higher prices. So clearly, this is an idea that not only doesn't make any sense.
Mr. Peter, sorry for interrupting you, but we're going to have to move to the Palestinian word.
Repeating the same pattern over and over again. Deny protected status to all those that international law were enacted to protect, notably civilians, including children and humanitarians. Deny humanitarian aid, including the most vital for the survival of the population. Destroy all civilian infrastructure and all conditions of life. Displace the population over and over and over again, while making sure they have nowhere to go and that anywhere and everywhere they go, they are not safe. Kill at will and explain that it is never your fault. Madam President, look at what Israel did with UNIFIL. We told you to leave. If you stay, you can be attacked. Outrageous argument, and yet that is what happened repeatedly. And that is what the Israeli Prime Minister and war criminal said himself. So if they can use this argument against a UN force deployed and mandated by this council, what chance do Palestinian and now Lebanese civilians stand when faced with the same logic? Leave or turn into a legitimate military target. Leave or die, and very often leave and die. Israel has declared an all-out war against the Palestinian people, and its attacks against the UN are an integral part of this war. to destroy the conditions of life in Gaza. Israel needs to make sure no one can help restore them, even minimally. Israel's attack against UNRWA is part of its assault against the Palestine refugees it serves and the Palestinian civilian population it is trying to help survive. It is genocide. Cold-blooded, planned, and executed genocide for the perpetrators. Burning, terrifying, harrowing genocide for the victims. What is happening in northern Gaza now is another level of monstrosity. Silence and inaction are not an option. Are you ready to proclaim that while Palestinians refuse to surrender, even when faced with collective capital punishment, this council decided to surrender? We know that many members around this table refuse to do so, and we count on them today to fight back with the tools provided by the Charter and by the law to combat those who are obliterating the Charter and the law. This is the responsibility of the Council and of each and every state around the world. The matter is straightforward, plain and simple. The massacres have to stop. Cease fire now. No delay and no condition. And life-saving assistance must immediately reach the civilian population in Gaza, notably northern Gaza. No delay and no excuses. The measure of our success is the lives we save. Madam President, you all see the bombardments and the destruction, the famine, and the denial of humanitarian aid, while Israel explains it is upholding the principles of distinction and proportionality and showing photos of trucks entering Gaza. Absurdity meets inhumanity. By now, you all know Israeli lies. You all know Israel is committing war crimes and crimes against humanity. By now, you are witnesses of the genocide, whether you recognize it yet or will recognize it later. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. Let me be clear. A member of these United Nations that has committed such egregious, repeated, and prolonged breaches of its charter, that has committed such atrocities, and that has attacked the UN, declaring the Secretary General persona non grata, that has killed and maimed UN staff and attacked UN headquarters and shelters, and is openly attempting to destroy a UN agency, and continuously inciting against the UN, and that now has added attacking UN peacekeepers to the list, such a member has nothing to do among us and has already surrendered its membership by violating every single obligation and commitment that comes with it. We are not powerless. This Council is not powerless. These United Nations are not powerless. The international community is not powerless. To the brutal use of force, we must respond with the full force of the law. To the brutal use of force, we must respond with the full force of the law. Hundreds of thousands of lives hang in the balance. The future of our region hangs in the balance. The future of our international law-based order hangs in the balance. The safety of millions of civilians in the region hangs in the balance. Regional and international peace and security hang in the balance. This is worth fighting for. Don't surrender to the fire. Don't surrender to the arsonist. It is time to fight back, or the whole region will go up in flames. Humanity must prevail over this inhumanity. And for the record, let me state once again, we are for the protection of all civilians and against harming any civilian. But Palestinian civilians are not less civilian, and their lives are not less worthy of protection. We want a Middle East where all states live in peace and security, but that must include the Palestinian state. We want peace, but the only path to peace is through freedom for the Palestinian people and respect for their right to self-determination. We are for respect for international law by all and for the benefit of all. Stop the genocide. Stop the genocide. End this occupation-made famine and humanitarian crisis. Let people return to where their homes once stood and their communities once lived, to resume their lives and rebuild what can be, to mourn and try to restore life. Free prisoners and hostages. Let families reunite in life and not death, and let them try to the extent possible to heal. Help us chart a path away from occupation and wars. Help us achieve freedom, justice, and peace, so these horrors can never occur again. Never again. It is time to act. Anything else is complicity and surrender. The Palestinian people enduring hell did not surrender. Neither should you. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Madam President. 376 days since the largest slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust. For 376 days, 101 human beings, men, women, children, elderly, have been tormented by Hamas terrorists in their terror dungeons. Over the weekend, another brutal assault struck Israel. A Hezbollah drone attacked the northern city of Binyamin.
That was the Palestinian speech by Riyad Mansour, the Palestinian ambassador at the United Nations. That was at the UN Security Council meeting, where he described the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza as the Israeli occupation forces proceed in committing war crimes against Palestinian civilians and proceed with this genocide. Now we're going to move back to our economic bulletin, and moving to Europe, United Kingdom inflation fell more than expected to a 3-year low in September, cementing expectations of potential interest rates cut. The Office for National Statistics reported a 1.7% rise in consumer prices in September, down from 2.2% in August, mainly due to lower airfares and petrol prices. However, price pressures eased across the board, including in the services sector, which is a key concern for policymakers as it makes up about 80% of the UK economy. Italy plans to raise around 0.2% of GDP, which amounts to 4 billion euros in 2025, through changes to taxes on banks, insurance, and gaming licenses. The country's draft budgetary plan, submitted for European Commission approval, estimates that these measures will contribute 0.168% of GDP towards strengthening public finances. In addition, the Italian government expects to raise 3.5 billion euros from domestic banks and insurers as part of its budget proposals for the next 3 years. The budget plan also predicts that revenue from the financial sector will decrease by 0.073% of GDP in 2026 and by 0.96% in 2027. In Asia, India's merchandise trade deficit for September was smaller than anticipated, largely due to a significant drop in gold imports. Government data showed that trade deficit stood at $20.78 billion, a decrease from the previous month 10-month high of $29.65 billion. Merchandise exports fell slightly to $34.58 billion in September, compared to $34.71 billion in August. However, the decline in imports was more pronounced, dropping to $55.36 billion from $64.36 billion. Gold imports were particularly low in September, amounting to $4.39 billion, down sharply from $10.6 billion in August. The United States, South Korea, and Japan have announced the creation of a new multinational team to oversee the enforcement of sanctions against North Korea, following Russia and China's obstruction of monitoring efforts at the United Nations. The newly formed multilateral sanctions monitoring team aims to continue the work of the UN panel of experts, which had been responsible for overseeing the implementation of sanctions on North Korea's nuclear and missile programs for the past 15 years. The team will involve 8 other countries, including the United Kingdom, France, and Germany, and will issue regular reports on sanctions enforcement. Hong Kong's leader, John Lee, vowed to implement significant reforms aimed at revitalizing the economy and financial markets, while also addressing the worsening living conditions for the city's poorest residents. In his third policy address, Lee emphasized the need for deeper reforms and new growth areas. He outlined plans to overhaul regulations, promote innovation, and boost investment, particularly in tourism, logistics, and advanced manufacturing, to drive sustainable growth. In an unexpected move, Thailand's central bank cut key interest rates at its policy meeting in a move to stimulate the struggling economy, with inflation remaining below target. The Bank of Thailand's Monetary Policy Committee voted 5-2 to reduce the one-day repurchase rate by 25 basis points, lowering it to 2.25% after maintaining a decade-high rate of 2.5% since September 2023. The central bank explained that the rate cut would help ease the debt burden while still supporting efforts to reduce the household debt to GDP ratio. The UNRWA Commissioner General Philip Lazzarini stated that about 70% of the infrastructure in Gaza has been destroyed due to the Israeli aggression. The commissioner also added that 200 of UNRWA staff have been killed by Israeli airstrikes. Lazzarini added that the majority of Gaza's population is crowded into an area that makes up no more than 10% of the entire territory of Gaza. That's all for now. Here's a roundup of today's key headlines. Former U.S. President Donald Trump renews his call for imposing extreme tariffs on imports. UK inflation falls more than expected to a 3-year low in September. And UNRWA Commissioner General states that Israeli aggression destroyed about 70% of Gaza's infrastructure. That's all for today's economic bulletin on Q News. Stay connected for more news and updates. Don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at QNewsEG to stay informed. For real-time updates, connect with us on the UMS digital platform Watch It. Thank you so much for watching.